its own capability to favor commercial contracts exclusively for precisely the reasons I have mentioned. So to pose a situation where there has to be an either-or choice, as being put forth to us by this administration, I think is wrong policy. I think also that there has been much mudslinging, a lot of heat, not much light, on both sides of the argument, where those who favor continued government spaceflight programs point out all the flaws with commercial entities, and of course commercial entities are not loath to point out how disgustingly inefficient government is. We're at risk of blaming dogs for being dogs and cats for being cats. Okay? Government programs and government efforts and commercial efforts, government enterprises and commercial enterprises are different things and are meant to be, and they each have advantages and disadvantages, and they have purposes in our society. And the United States, in my view, owes its position in the world to a formerly artful blending of these purposes and capabilities, far from perfect, but better than most other people manage to do. So let me outline some of what I see the differences being. First of all, a government enterprise is generally something for which there exists no public market. Government is generally speaking the only or the major consumer. So it's a public purpose, and the risk is adopted as a public risk, meaning public funds are put in, or in some cases lives are at risk, or whatever. But these are public purposes with public risks. Government is the entity that we as a society use to spread these risks. Now, this could be recovery from Katrina, recovery from a Gulf oil spill, it could be a war in the Mideast, it could be a space program. Okay, it could be Hoover Dam or the Tennessee Valley Authority. It could be a purpose of which you approve or a purpose of which you don't. We've all lived long enough to have seen plenty of all those kinds. The point is that through what we regard as democratic processes, we decide that a certain purpose is to be accomplished. It isn't market-driven or market-based, and so it will be publicly funded at public risk for public purposes. Now, when we do those things, such efforts are accompanied by lots and lots of rules and regulations, which are incredibly inefficient. I've spent probably 80% of my life in public service. The rules that we have to operate on in public service are incredibly inefficient. It is a good thing the United States is so rich, because we waste a lot of money through the means that we choose to accomplish many of these public purposes, whether you're talking about building highways or building spacecraft. So it is trivial, it is trite, it is sophomoric to point out that industry could do it much better. In fact, government project managers could do it much better if allowed to. And I've participated in many, many classified spaceflight development programs which were accomplished effectively and inefficiently under the protective blanket of classification to allow managers to do what they need to do without having a lot of outside scrutiny. However, those programs are the exception rather than the rule, because in a democratic society, we choose purposefully to inflict inefficiency on our various executive branch program managers rather than to be subject to the anti-democratic exercise of arbitrary authority. Our Constitution, from its earliest days, was set up on purpose by our framers to first and foremost prevent the untrammeled exercise of executive branch authority. And it reaches from the basic principles that organized and structured the Constitution right down to federal acquisition law affecting a spacecraft program manager. If I'm a spacecraft program manager for the government, I can't just go out and do what seems to me to be the most sensible, no matter how much skill, education, or experience I may have. I have a lot of people I have to keep happy. It's the law. It's the way we do it in order to prevent the untrammeled exercise of executive authority. So to blame executive agencies of government for acting as they are told to act is silly. And I'll quote Werner von Braun, who said, you know, it is inefficient, and I'm not quoting exactly, he said it acknowledged the inefficiencies, pointed out that he had run a space program under a tyranny and run a space program under a democracy, and all things being equal, he'd take the latter. I think Dr. von Braun was right about that, as he was about a number of other things. So for commercial enterprises to say that government is inefficient is like me saying that 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, no kidding. Now, commercial enterprises are typified by many customers and many suppliers competing for a limited business base. The winners win and the losers go do something else. That's when it works well. It's market-driven. The products of a commercial marketplace are built to a perceived need, and the ones who win are the ones who are best at perceiving the need. And the buyers have to buy what's available. If you want a special purpose limousine built, you can have that done, but it's not a commercial product. It's going to be built to your order, and you'll pay what it costs, and it'll be a lot. The development is done at private risk, in private hands, and the product which is offered on an arm's length transactional take-it-or-leave-it basis. Public funding is not at risk, or not substantially at risk in commercial developments. Now, certainly we can have private-public partnerships. We see that in Western democracies all over the world, Western-style democracies all over the world. It is entirely possible to have a private-public partnership with certain structured rules. But if we say that we're going to have a commercial spaceflight development industry, what's being offered is not it. Now, other issues that I would have specifically with the administration's proposals and what they do to human spaceflight. I like to think I know something about running real programs that actually produce real hardware that sits on top of real rockets and goes somewhere and does something. I spent the most enjoyable years of my life doing that. A feature that real programs have, whether spaceflight programs or anything else, are the existence of a goal, a date, and a budget. And those three things have to be thought at least to match up. In other words, it has to be a doable goal within a realizable date on a budget that the program manager actually thinks he can get the job done for. A real program cannot rely on technical miracles. You can have one or two aggressive developments in the course of a real program, but if everything you're relying on doesn't exist when you start, you're not going to ever finish. You can have one or two things that you really don't know how to do, and then you better have some parallel paths. Real programs are realized by turning existing technology into product. They are not realized by creating massive amounts of new technology. That can come about as a result of the perceived inadequacy of existing technology to meet the goals you'd really like to have, in which case you go off and develop it. But one of the three main causes of programmatic failure is to begin a program with inadequate technology. So you don't start programs with new game-changing technology. Program managers need control of resources. A government program manager operating on public funds who is relying upon a supposedly existing commercial product that may or may not be there, there's no possible way that comes to a good end. Real programs that go for any length of time have to have a consistent and constant purpose for that length of time. You cannot change the requirements. That's another of the three leading causes of program failure. You have to outline the purpose and you have to stick to it. If it's a publicly funded effort, the purpose has to be judged in the public mind to be a worthy purpose. You have to have the public behind you. NASA always has.